А вот очевидец.
Да, мы испугались. Потом он завис вот над этим деревом.
I don't believe in most UFO sightings because they're so easy to fake. But there are a few that make me wonder if something is really out there.
Завис он, дверь открылась, и посмотрел большой человек, 3 метра. Головы не было, плеч тоже, у него было просто такой бугорок, вот.
Вместо головы?
Да, вот отсюда, вот такой. По бокам один в серединке. Как голова у него не может поворачиваться, так в середине глаз он у него поворачивался. Он мог смотреть вправо, влево, вверх, вниз. Вот. И вместо носа было 2 дырки просто.
Я смотрю, как очертание человека, прям, вот облик его. Вот он прям, знаете, как вот, как чертеж, знаете, карандашом чертит, вот такой же тонкий, только голова у него была большая.
Большая.
Вот,
уши какие были? Вы заметил, уши были у него? Нет ушей?
Ушей вообще не было.
Не было.
И волос не было, вообще лысый просто.
Лысый. Глаза были, нос.
Глаза были, и вот нос у него, знаете, вот как вот так расходится.
Широкий.
Вот так.
Черный сам был, силуэт мы видели один.
I was standing not far from the main road of the South Park, and I saw this flying object at an approximate height 250 meters.
It stayed at the same height and did not move horizontally. I was very interested by all that, because it could not be any kind of meteorological balloon.
The evening of September 27th, 1989, was warm and still in the Russian city of Voronezh, a sprawling industrial center some 300 miles southeast of Moscow. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a handful of children played in South Park, unaware that their ordinary world was about to tilt into the extraordinary. From the darkening sky, a pinkish luminescence began to bloom, intensifying into a deep crimson sphere that pulsed with an unearthly light. What followed would become one of the most bizarre and widely reported UFO encounters ever to emerge from behind the Iron Curtain, dragging with it not only a craft and its pilot, but a silent, boxy robot that walked the earth. Stay tuned as we uncover the full, astonishing account of the Voronezh landing, an event that shattered the notion that alien encounters are merely an American obsession.
I remember a crowd that gathered around the place. Everybody was scared. Everybody turned pale. I was absolutely flabbergasted.
I saw some traces there, and also a strange man. Outwardly, he looked like any other man, only he was huge. A moment later, he suddenly disappeared.
I had no doubt that the UFO and the giants existed, because I saw them. But sometimes when I look back, it seems sort of like a fairy tale.
The creatures started coming out. They did not look too much like humans. They were much taller than humans. They did have shoulders, but I didn't see the head.
We walk. We look and see this ball, such a brilliant iridescent flue. We ran to that gate, reached and stopped. It hung there.
Where is the object headed?
Here, it flew, then hung at the level of a poplar tree.
What is poplar?
This one, nearby.
Right at the level of the top of the poplar tree hung?
No, in the middle part of it.
Show it not as you are told, but as you saw it yourself.
Here, well, somewhere over there. Could you see? See this lamp on the pole, approximately at this level.
And so clear, and near the poplar.
Yes, and right here, where Yura Sergachev, right there, stood, sat down there, landed, and the light changed, stood for 10 minutes, or maybe 5 minutes. Something we were afraid, and his rose a little, and meter and a half, and disappeared.
Everybody laughed. There was an article in the New York Times, laughing at those kids had seen a strange UFO and the creatures around it at Voronezh.
The first to notice the strange light were 3 children, Vasya Surin, Genya Blinov, and Yulia Sholokova. They froze in place as the pink glow in the sky condensed into a dark red ball, silently gliding toward them. The sphere was immense, estimated between 5 and 9 meters wide, and it moved with a deliberate, intelligent purpose. As it halted directly above the park, hovering roughly 12 meters over the grass, the children could see the blades of grass below being pressed flat and swirled into spiraling patterns by an invisible force. The object itself made no sound. The only noise was the faint rustle of disturbed vegetation. Then, without warning, the sphere floated away, vanishing into the gloom, only to return a few minutes later. By this time, a crowd of about 40 adults had gathered, drawn by the frantic whispers and pointing fingers of the children. They all watched as a small hatch irised open on the bottom of the craft. From the opening, a face emerged. A three-eyed creature, its skin pale and its features almost insect-like, peered out and scanned the terrain with a slow, methodical turn of its head. Satisfied with its survey, it withdrew back inside, and the entire sphere descended gently, landing in the park with a soft, final thump. A door slid open on the bottom of the craft, and the being, or one identical to it, stepped out onto the soil of Voronezh. It was not alone. Beside it walked a bizarre, boxy robot, angular and mechanical, moving on stilt-like legs. The entity itself stood nearly 3 meters tall, clad in silvery overalls that gleamed under the evening light, with bronze boots and a large circular disc affixed to its chest. Its head was wide but shallow, a small dome that rested directly on its massive shoulders without any intervening neck. The face was dominated by 2 white, expressionless eyes, and between them a third eye, red as a dying ember, glowed faintly. This third eye gave the entire countenance a deeply unsettling asymmetry, a biological anomaly that no human eye could comfortably parse. The being uttered a short, guttural phrase, and instantly a glowing rectangle shimmered into existence on the ground before it, like a trapdoor of pure light projected onto the grass. It spoke another phrase, and the rectangle vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Reaching over to its mechanical companion, the creature adjusted something on the robot's chassis, and the machine began to stomp away across the park, its movements jerky but purposeful. A young boy in the crowd, overwhelmed by the impossible sight, screamed in terror. The three-eyed giant swiveled its head toward the sound with a mechanical snap, and twin beams of intense light shot from its white eyes, striking the boy full in the chest. The child was not merely blinded, he was instantly paralyzed, rooted to the spot, his scream dying in his throat as his muscles locked tight. The crowd erupted into panic, people stumbling backward, mothers dragging their children away, men shouting incoherent warnings. But in the next heartbeat, the sphere, the robot, and the towering being all simply vanished, as though erased from reality by a cosmic hand. Yet the relief was short-lived. 5 minutes later, the visitors reappeared, materializing in the same spot as if they had never left. This time, the lanky being carried a new implement, a tube about 1 meter long, resembling a sleek, metallic weapon. It raised the tube and aimed it squarely at a 16-year-old boy who stood frozen at the edge of the crowd. A flash of light, a collective gasp, and the teenager simply ceased to exist. He was not obscured or camouflaged. He had been removed from reality entirely. Before anyone could process the horror, the creature climbed back into its craft. The sphere rose silently into the sky and flew off, and in the exact moment of its departure, the missing teenager reappeared, unharmed but utterly disoriented, as if no time at all had passed for him. The official Soviet response to what happened in Voronezh was nothing short of astonishing. For decades, the USSR had suppressed any discussion of anomalous phenomena, treating UFO sightings as ideologically dangerous Western fairy tales. But under the new policy of Glasnost, the state media was experimenting with unprecedented openness, and on October 9, 1989, the TASS news agency dropped a bombshell. They reported that a flying saucer had indeed landed in Voronezh, and that scientists had confirmed the event. This was not a fringe publication or a samizdat pamphlet. This was the official mouthpiece of the Soviet government, suddenly lending its immense weight to a story that would have been unthinkable just years before. Dr. Genrikh Silanov, head of the Voronezh Geophysical Laboratory, led the scientific investigation. Using a technique he called biolocation, his team identified a perfect circle on the ground, 20 meters in diameter, where the grass had been flattened. Within this circle, they found 4 deep, clean depressions arranged in a diamond pattern, each 4 to 5 centimeters deep, with a diameter of about 15 centimeters. Based on these measurements, Dr. Yuri Losovtsev calculated that the landed object must have weighed approximately 11 tons. Even more baffling was the soil itself. Beneath the flattened grass, the earth had been transformed, its consistency altered to that of stone. And then there were the rocks. The investigators recovered 2 pieces of a deep red substance that looked like sandstone, but mineralogical analysis revealed that it could not be found anywhere on Earth. The story deepened when reporters from TASS and the newspaper Sovetskaya Kultura descended on Voronezh. They discovered that the September 27th landing at South Park was not an isolated incident. It was the climax of a 9-day wave of sightings that had swept through the region between September 21st and 29th. Dozens of residents came forward, describing red spheres that appeared between 6 and 9 in the evening, moving silently across the sky, hovering, then darting away at impossible speeds. Most of these sightings involved only the glowing sphere, but some witnesses reported the 3-eyed alien and its boxy robot walking together across fields and parking lots. Others described entirely different occupants, short, grayish-green creatures wearing loose-fitting blue overcoats, who would stare at witnesses for long moments before retreating into their luminous craft. The sheer volume of independent reports, many of them predating the media coverage, made it impossible to dismiss the events as a simple hoax or mass hysteria. Even Lieutenant Sergei A. Matveyev of the Voronezh District Police, a man not prone to fantasy, admitted in a telephone interview that he had personally witnessed the craft. He conceded he had not seen the aliens themselves, but he saw the object flying at high speed and low altitude, completely silent. "I thought I must be really tired," he said, "but I rubbed my eyes and it didn't go away. Then I figured, in this day and age, anything is possible." When the story crossed into the West, it was greeted with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch and the New York Times picked it up, but Western journalists often framed it as a quirky Soviet oddity, a product of a society unaccustomed to the sensationalism of Western media. Many reports emphasized that the primary witnesses were children, conveniently ignoring the 40 adults who had also gathered at the park. Some American accounts incorrectly stated that there had been 2 alien beings instead of 1, and most entirely failed to mention the 9-day wave of sightings that both preceded and followed the main event. The narrative was subtly but insistently shaped to suggest that the Voronezh incident was a childish fantasy amplified by a naive, newly liberated press. Yet for those who looked deeper, the details refused to be explained away. The physical traces were real. The police and scientific investigations were real. The terror in the voices of the witnesses, recorded and transcribed by skeptical reporters, was undeniably real. What makes the Voronezh encounter so profoundly significant is that it does not exist in a vacuum. The elements that seem so bizarre, the paralysis, the tube-like weapon, the diminutive or towering figures who leave lasting marks on the ground, are not unique to this one Russian park. They are echoes of a pattern that stretches back centuries and spans the globe. Consider the tube. On July 1st, 1965, in the lavender fields near Valençol, France, farmer Maurice Mass encountered a landed oval craft and 2 short figures with oversized heads and slanted eyes. One of the beings pointed a pencil-like device at Massa, and he found himself instantly paralyzed, frozen in place for 20 long minutes, while the beings calmly inspected their surroundings and then departed. An even more dramatic case of collective paralysis occurred on September 30th, 1954. in the small French village of Nouatre. Georges Gattet, the foreman of an 8-man construction crew, found himself inexplicably drawn away from his co-workers, walking in a daze toward a large, shining dome that hovered just above a nearby slope. Standing before the dome was a figure in a gray coverall and short boots, its head encased in an opaque glass helmet with a visor reaching to its chest. In its hand, the figure held an elongated metallic rod. Gattet tried to run, but his legs would not obey him. He was nailed to the spot, completely paralyzed, and he was not alone. All 7 of his co-workers, scattered across the construction site, were similarly frozen, locked in place by an invisible force that held them captive for the duration of the sighting. When the dome rose into the sky in a series of jerking motions and vanished into a blue haze, the paralysis lifted as if a switch had been thrown. Gattet and his men, none of whom had previously believed in flying saucers, were left with headaches, insomnia, and a traumatic confusion that lasted for weeks. These modern accounts of remote paralysis and tube-wielding entities do not emerge from nowhere. Long before the first reported flying saucer, human beings were telling stories about beings who could freeze a person with a gesture or a wand. In the folklore of medieval Europe, fairies were widely feared for their ability to paralyze hapless humans who stumbled upon their gatherings. The fairy blast or fairy stroke could leave a person rigid, speechless, and helpless, sometimes for hours, sometimes for a lifetime. The instrument of this paralysis was often a wand, a slender rod that the fairy would point at the victim, exactly as Maurice Masse described in his Lavender Field, exactly as the witnesses in Voronezh described the tube aimed at a teenager. Across the Atlantic, the Paiute people of the American West tell stories of a previous civilization that occupied present-day California, a people who wielded small tubes that could stun an enemy from a distance, dropping them without a sound or a wound. In the highlands of Chiapas, Mexico, the Celtal Maya speak of the Yacals, short, black, hairy humanoids that inhabit the remote forests and caves, beings that sometimes paralyze those who cross their path, leaving them rigid and mute until the Ical chooses to release them. Perhaps the most chilling evidence of all was captured not in Russia, but in Mississippi, 16 years earlier, when Calvin Parker and Charles Hickson sat alone in a police interview room, unwittingly being recorded. Their whispered, terrified conversation about what they had endured aboard a hovering craft on the Pascagoula River mirrored the trauma that the Voronezh witnesses would later articulate. The clawed hands, the paralysis, the invasive examination by beings with dead, curious eyes strip away the cultural specifics, and you are left with an experience that is recognizably the same. This consistency across time, geography, and culture suggests that something real is happening. Whether that something is a physical visitation from beyond the stars, a psychological phenomenon generated by the deep structures of the human brain, or a complex interaction between the two, the impact on the witnesses is undeniable. They are not fabricators, and they are not insane. They are ordinary people who walked into an ordinary park, or a field, or a construction site, and found themselves thrust into the center of an ancient and terrifying mystery. Now let's discuss another chilling piece of Soviet UFO history that remained hidden for decades. On November 29, 1968, a newspaper in the Russian city of Beryozovsky published a strange front-page story about 5 glowing balls of light appearing in the sky. 4 of these bright objects flew off in different directions, but the 5th began dropping fast, spinning downward until it vanished behind a thick forest. Moments later, the ground shook with a massive explosion, and a column of smoke rose above the trees. The newspaper gave a dull official explanation, blaming an accident caused by a careless worker at a nearby storage facility. But no one who heard the real story believed that weak cover-up, because something had crashed in those woods, and the Soviet military had rushed to secure it. For years, rumors spread among a small circle of collectors about film reels that showed what really happened. A researcher named Veniamin Vereshchagin finally tracked down this footage on the black market, and what it contains is remarkable. The film shows a military truck pulling up to a crash site where soldiers in heavy winter coats jump out and form a guard line. Their captain meets another officer already at the scene, and together they walk toward a large disc-shaped object stuck in the frozen ground. 2 different cameras recorded everything, one held by a cameraman on the truck, and another sitting on a tripod that pans to follow the soldiers. A man in civilian clothes, probably a KGB agent, points and gives orders, directing the cameraman to focus on the disc from different angles. Nearly 1,200 feet of film negative was found, showing soldiers guarding and examining the object, though none of the recovered footage shows them actually pulling it from the ground. Another reel of film is even more disturbing. It shows Russian doctors and scientists gathered around an examination table, speaking in calm, professional voices as they cut into a biological specimen. They take careful measurements and remove small pieces of tissue, placing samples into jars. The lead doctor describes structures that look like ribs, as if they are working on the torso of a human-like creature. He refers to the subject by a KGB code name that translates to something like "scared lots." At the end of the procedure, the medical team poses for the camera, holding up samples like proud hunters displaying a trophy. Experts who studied the film found many details that support its authenticity. Sergei Goncharov, a specialist in Russian film stock, confirmed the cans and negatives were made at a factory in the Soviet Union in March 1969, matching the time period exactly. He also pointed out flash frames between scenes that show uniformed men and civilians not part of the main action, little accidental glimpses that would be very hard to fake. Medical reviewers noted that the cutting techniques, the surgical tools, and even the lack of protective gloves matched standard Soviet forensic practices of that era. Documents recovered with the film added more weight to the story. A top-secret KGB report described the recovery operation in detail, and a Soviet Ministry of Defense order requested help from Military Unit 67527, whose winter uniform patches matched those seen on the soldiers in the footage. But the most haunting detail came in the form of 3 death certificates, all dated March 24, 1969, just 1 week after the examination took place. Each listed the cause of death as cerebral hemorrhage, a sudden bleeding in the brain. Medical experts consulted on the case said the odds of 3 people dying this way so close together by pure chance are almost 0. The building where the dissection was filmed still exists today as the Moscow Medical Institute, and its distinctive stone tables and tiled floors match the footage perfectly. Whether this film captures a genuine alien recovery or an elaborate hoax, the consistency of the evidence across the documents, the expert analysis, and the physical location makes it one of the most haunting and convincing UFO cases ever to emerge from the secret archives of the Soviet Union. Thank you for joining us on this journey into one of the most extraordinary and well-documented UFO encounters in history. If this story captivated you, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to know that the truth is far stranger than fiction. Drop a comment below and tell us your theory. What do you believe landed in that park in Voronezh, and why does its description echo through centuries of human folklore?